Chapter 23 of Boy the Wandering Dog. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry, Johnson City, Tennessee. Boy the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 23. Living out here in the country as we do, I see a great many poor people, either coming here to beg, tramping by the high road, or sitting on the rustic benches that masters have had placed all along the sidewalks that bound his property. I am amazed at the topsy-turviness of their ideas. Now, rich people are not perfect, but on the whole they seem to have more common sense than the idle poor. These shabby dressed persons perch round on the benches, stare at master's big white house showing among the trees, and these are their sentiments. I wish I'd been born rich. I wish someone would die and leave me some money. I wish I didn't have to work. One man only, in the whole course of my eavesdropping under hedges, have I heard say, "That's a wise man in that big house. He's slaved for what he's got. Let him keep it." However, this kind of lazy talk does not affect Master and Mr. Bonstone. I have heard them say again and again that there are frightful inequalities in the human lot, that every man does not get a living wage, and there should be more brotherhood and sympathy between class and class. Perhaps that is why they never get disgusted or offended or suspicious. Some of the rich people about here say that they are bothered to death with squealing, envious poor persons who hang around them, begging for money for this scheme and that scheme, which has always at bottom the everlasting endeavor to get something for nothing. Master and Mr. Bonstone smile, and never worry, nor argue, nor fuss. They just keep on helping everyone that applies to them. One day, the first summer we came out here, I was up on the balcony, outside Master's bedroom, with him. He had come home from the city, very hot and tired, and he was having a lovely time, lounging in a big chair with a glass of lemonade at his elbow. The parlour maid came up and said that a young man wished to see him. Master got up patiently, put on his coat, and went downstairs with me at his heels. An unprepossessing looking young fellow awaited him in the hall. He had a loose mouth, and he talked out of one side of it, and his jaw was undershot, and one side like that of a badly put together dog. Master sat down on the monk's bench beside him. "What can I do for you, sir?" The lad twisted his rag of a cap in his hands. "I thought you might give me some money." "What do you want money for?" asked Master. "To get a job." Master smiled. "You don't wish money to get a job? You wish a job to get money?" "I had work," the fellow said, with a twist of his mouth, as if he tasted something bad, "but it didn't bring me in enough to keep body and soul together." "Now what kind of job do you want?" asked Master. "Something easy that will bring in lots of coin," he said audaciously. "Come now, you know things don't bring in lots of coin," said Master. The young fellow swept his eyes about the handsome entrance hall and said, "I bet you got this easy." Master shook his head and stifled a yawn. It was a hot day, and he does not believe in arguing. However, he said shortly, "I did work for it." "Go on," said the fellow jeeringly. "I don't swallow that." "Poor chap," said master kindly. "No power of digestion. Not on your own fault, likely." "What are you giving me?" said the young man wonderingly. Master looked him all over. I knew what he was thinking. Poor, weak-backed gutter boy, fished out of the troubled waters of New York and sent here to be reformed. But it was master's duty to undertake the job. Likely he'd fail, but it was up to him to try. "Come on, boy," he said suddenly, clapping the lad's greasy shoulder. "Let's go look for something for you." The lad put on his old reed of a cap on his head, but master strolled out bareheaded. The sun was getting low, and it was not as hot as it had been. First he went to the gardens and tried them on the lad. Roses and cabbage did not appeal to him, and he surveyed them with a dull eye. He didn't care to dig in the ground. Master took him to the garage. No motor cars did not strike his fancy either. He hadn't courage nor skill enough to manage any kind of machine. The tiny stable was the next place to visit. Here lived Moonstone, a Shetland pony, nominally George Washington's. He was too young to ride it yet, and young Egbert had the sole use of it. Neither did the pony appeal to the poor city boy. I could have told master he didn't care for animals, for he had successfully passed by me, Amadea, King Harry, and Canny, without a word for one of us. "Let's stroll down to the village," said master. "Perhaps we'll find something there." So down we went along the high road, then fragrant with flowering rose bushes. First there was cottages and villas standing back from the road and gardens on lawns. The boy was not interested in them. When we got to the stores, his eye brightened. Master, who was watching him shrewdly, saw his hungry gaze go toward the grocer's. It was a store with a fine display. Behind big windows for the village women had a health association and would allow no food to be displayed on the street, were stacks of fruit and vegetables, and everything a first-class grocer should keep. All the neighborhood patronized the man, and it enabled him to keep an excellent stock. "Would you like to stand behind a counter?" asked master. "I might," said the lad. "You think it would be an easy job?" said master slyly. Then he smiled. The lad grinned. He had some sense of humor. "Mr. Washburn," exclaimed my master, "may I speak to you?" The grocer came running from his office, where he was making up his accounts. "Will you take a friend of mine for a few days' trial?" asked master. The grocer was immaculately clean, and his eye ran over the greasy-looking boy. "We'll have to fix him up a bit," said master. "I'll take him," said Mr. Washburn, "on your recommendation." "Don't work him too hard at first," said master. "You're a hustler, I know." The lad opened his dull eyes and looked so dismayed that the two men burst out laughing. Finally the young fellow laughed too. He felt that he would not be imposed on. Master then took him to the village shoemaker, whose wife kept a boarding house for young men. Here were a number of city lads who were working in Mr. Bonstone's automobile school. It was now close on 6 o'clock, and they were all sitting on the front veranda, with their feet on the railing. Master introduced the newcomer and asked one of the lads to take him to the dry goods store and buy a ready-made suit, have it charged to him, also to take him to the neighborhood hall and introduce him and give him a good time. The newcomer, whose name was Walt Dixon, took care of everything as a matter of course. He showed neither surprise nor gratitude. Master nodded his head slightly to the lad who was to take him in charge. That meant watch him, find out what his morals are. If there is anything that would endanger village life, let me know and I'll ship him elsewhere. Now all this happened some time ago, and as Gringo says, it's up to Walt Dixon to make good. But he can't. He's merely a putty sort of lad. He does his work spasmodically. He tries the grocer's patience. He has always to be watched and guarded. Nobody likes him. Nobody dislikes him. He's not immoral. He's not strictly moral. He's a kind of grown-up baby, Master says. But he's supporting himself, and he's out of New York, where he's loafed and lived off the earnings of his mother and sister. The only good thing about him is that he's faintly grateful and slightly attached to my master, and I should not wonder if some day he would be brought to our house to work in some capacity or other. The most of Master's brother boys, as he calls them, are bright, smart lads who would have gone wrong, usually through no fault of their own, and when their feet were set on the right track, they run like hounds toward a definite goal. They have brains. Walt Dixon is almost foolish. Master dreads mentally defective lads and degenerate ones, but he never hesitates to tackle them. Nor does Mr. Bonstone. He had what might have been a very serious case of a defective lad in this neighborhood a fortnight ago. Gringo told me about it. He came over one morning in great haste and flopped down beside me as I stood on the kitchen veranda, lapping my milk and bread breakfast. "Well, old boy," I said, "what's up with you?" "Come on out under the grapevine," he said. We walked over a little arbor where cook sits to prepare vegetables for dinner and lay down in the shade. "That's it, McGrailey brat," said Gringo. The McGrailey brat is a half-foolish boy, the only son of a very respectable Scotch-American gardener down in the village. "He tried to burn us up," said Gringo. "Good gracious, tell me about it," I said. The old boy licked his lips and began. "Last night at 12 I got up to lap up a little water from my basin in my boss's bathroom. I was just saying to myself, if I'm dry out here, the Bowery dogs must be on fire, when I heard 6 yelps from that imp Yeggie. 6 yelps, I repeated. That means trouble in the hen house." "Sure," continued Gringo. "They were pretty sharp yelps. So up I goes to Master's bed and nips his foot stitching out for coolness. He's always alive. So out he tumbled and said, 'Go ahead, pup.'" "You like to have him call you pup?" I interjected. "It makes you feel young." Gringo's fine eyes grew soft. "It makes me hark back to the West, in lively days when we both acted like kids." "How old are you, Gringo?" I asked curiously. "Never you mind that, young dog," he said. "I'm as old as I look, and I look younger than I am. So let me go on with my story." "You're an awful interpreter." The boss and I tumbled over each other to get to young Yeg, who was waiting out on the gravel. He pointed for the hen houses, and there was the grand Sir Walter Sparing, dodging, pushing, and barking at foolish young Willie, who had a box of matches in his hand. The young Rap had set fire to every dry patch of grass in the orchard, and neat little blazes were leaping up to greet us, too friendly by a long shot. "Dear me," I said, "this is thrilling, and everything so dry from the hot weather. What did you do?" I brushed Sir Walter in his etiquette side. "It's etiquette, Gringo," I reminded him. "It wasn't anything when I butted in," said the old dog stubbornly. Little Willie struck my fancy as a naughty bull, and I pinned him to Mother Earth. Mister put his 2 fingers in my mouth and let a whistle screech that brought the men and other dogs rolling out over and over in 2 minutes. They'd scamper out the blazers. "What about Willie?" I asked. Gringo burst into a hearty dog laugh. I let him rise to the occasion, and he trotted to Master and held out his box of matches and said, "Little Willie couldn't sleep, so he thought he'd come out and burn the bad weeds out of Mr. Bonstone's orchard, 'cause Mr. Bonstone is a kind man to Willie." I laughed too. That sounded like Yeggie's talk. "The boy had just about as much sense as Yeg," said Gringo. Mister threw a bag over to Sir Walter, who was smoking and smelt to heaven, for he too had been set on fire by the thoughtful Willie. Then he takes Master Willie by his shirt collar. He was in a long-tailed garment that looked as if his mother had bought it from the old country, and down to the village he marches the boy. "Didn't Mr. Bonstone dress?" I inquired. "In what, I suppose," was rather a shocked voice, for Gringo said disdainfully, "What'd he dress for? He had on a pair of decent pajamas, best outfit for a hot night, and no one was abroad but the moon. However, if you must know, Thomas brought him a cloak, and he threw it on when he went out to the village. At first Willie didn't want to go home. You know what a time we have to keep him off our place. Only by telling him that we were going down to the ballroom, which is his name for neighborhood hall, could we get him started. We trundled down to McGrailey's house, and Mister pounded on the door." I made an exclamation of pity, and Gringo said, "My heart was sore for them too. They've good Scotch heads, and the boy's an awful drag on their peace of mind." They stood in the doorway after my boss and pounded a while, white-faced and with eyebrows up. Mister was cool, but firm as a rock. He's often told them the boy would do some damage. He walked the boy before him into a stuffy parlor and sat down to one side of the big family Bible, and the McGraileys sat on the other. "How soon can you get your lad out of this?" asked Mister by his short way. Mrs. McGrailey began to cry, and old man McGrailey looked black. "Sir," said the woman, presently lifting her head, "suppose 'twas your boy." Father McGrailey took up the cry. "Yes," he said, "suppose 'twas your boy. Would you take him out of his warm bed, where you can look at him every night, and send him where he'd be beaten and driven and scared, and he, oh, great heavens, an idiot boy!" "He isn't an idiot," said Mister. "I've told you dozens of times he's a moron. He comes first in the class of mental defectives. Imbeciles and idiots are below him, and he does not stay in his warm bed." "I couldn't send him away," wailed Mrs. McGrailey, with her arms round Willie. "I couldn't give him up. He's all I have." "I told you," said Mister, striking his hand on the table. "There's a good institution upstate, and I saw boys in your Willie's class, and their faces were fine. They were feeding lads weaker than themselves. He'd be taught a trade too. I'm speaking for his good. He's a plague in this neighborhood." Father McGrailey looked madder. "I've heard you. sir, 100 times. Say you didn't believe in no herding of people or animals together. That you wouldn't even bring up a pup in kennels if you could find a home for him." "That's so," said my boss coolly. "But I made one exception. Persons whose minds are affected cut the very bottom out of society. There are criminals. I'd doctor them. What are you doing for your boy? Come on." The man and the woman looked at each other with quite cunning faces. The boss had finished strong. I was lying beside his chair, and thinks I to myself, "What'll they do now?" I knew they'd win out, for I tell you, boy, a pair of parents at bay is a worse team than a pair of tigers. "Stop, Gringo, a minute," I said. "Let me get my wits to work. 2 good citizens with a dangerous fool of a boy have got the richest man in the community concerned at midnight. He's got a good heart. They'll overcome him, but how? I'd give it up." "So did I," said Gringo triumphantly. "But they didn't, sir," said Mr. McGrailey in a voice that made my skin creep. It had the Scotch burr and an awful agony twisted up in it. "May you never know the heart scald that we've known. I tell you, sir, I've visited the police courts in New York. I've seen young men and women that were nothing but grown-up babies judged as if they were you or me. God pity the weak in brain, and I vowed a vow that I'd kill my son before I'd trust him to the stone heart of an unfeeling public." This was pretty stiff, and Mister began to waver. The woman came back with her old cry, "Suppose it was your boy. Suppose it was your boy." My boss's face softened. I knew his thoughts ran back to the room where the young John lay in his baby sleep, so soft, so happy, so coddled. Could anything tear that boy from his arms? Not the whole world. "My friends," he said softly, "I'm pleading for your boy. You don't understand. You're doing him an injustice to keep him here. There are institutions, I tell you, where he will be treated kindly." Mrs. McGrailey began to cry so horribly at this that Mister said in a hurry, "Well then, in the name of common sense, suggest a way out. Your boy is not going to run loose about this place. That's the very way to tear him from you." "Mr. Bonstone," said Mr. McGrailey, "you own 200 acres of wild land out Torbellon way." "Yes, mister," said he did. "Start a cottage colony, sir. Give me the post of head gardener. I'll build a house with my savings, and I'll give you the names of a score of persons like myself, who have children that are not like other children. They'll put some money in, but they won't send their boys and girls to a big institution." "I think you're wrong," said Mister, shaking his head. "Your boy would be better away from you, and you'd have to hire experts to train him and others like him." "Hire them," said Mr. McGrailey commandingly. "Look here," said my boss, "you fellows rate my bank account too high. I'm sailing close to the wind just now." "Trust you raise money," said the man almost contemptuously. "Haven't you and Randolph Granton got the name for good sense in business and wisdom in philanthropy? Ask your rich men. They'd give you funds when they'd turn a deaf ear to the likes of me." My boss got up. "Then I'm to start a private institution for Willie?" "That's it, sir," said Mr. McGrailey grimly. "You'll do that and more, too, for a neighbor." "Maybe I'm a fool," said Mister calmly, "but I'll think it over. Meanwhile, keep the boy close." "We'll do that, sir," said the man respectfully. Then he broke down, for he was all cut up. The boy had nearly killed him and his wife. He cried and she cried, and they caught the boss's hand and God blessed him, and he fled, and left his cloak with them, and he's coming up this evening to talk the affair over with your boss." "Don't those two men beat the Dutch for doing good?" I explained. "They even get up in the night to do it." End of chapter 23.